Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whether you're joining us from YouTube, LinkedIn Live, or Facebook, or 210 Cups and a String. No matter where you're joining us from, hello. My name is Jason Buffington. With me this week is not Dave Russell.
I'm
We've had
definitely
an
not Dave
upgrade
Russell.
for the month of September. Melissa Palmer. Melissa, I am so glad to have you. You are joining us all month.
I am. Thank you so much for extending the invite, Jason. I'm really looking forward to it.
So this is the first in a three-part series, and I am super excited about this. We're going to be talking about disaster recovery, business continuity. We hear a lot of hype about ransomware and cybersecurity. Certainly, one of the things I think a lot of folks don't realize is that ransomware and cyber attacks are just disasters, right? So we're going to talk about that holistically. Also, September is a good time to be thinking about this because when you're planning the what are you going to do better in 2022, disaster recovery planning is something that you ought to be doing better. Can we get an amen?
Amen. Absolutely.
Awesome. So please, so I am coming from the great state of Texas. Melissa is chimed in from New Jersey. Our producer is in Georgia. Over in the old country, we have Romania is also represented as well. So please pile on in the comments. Tell us where you're from. We'd love to turn the entire global map green during the webcast and each and every other day while we're at it. But let's go ahead and get started. So we're talking about disaster recovery, and Melissa, I think you've probably forgotten more about DR planning than I ever learned. So super excited to have you on for the series. Let's talk first and foremost. We brought in an expert here. Customers ought to be bringing in experts too, right? There's different kinds of personas that are involved when we really think about DR differently than backup. We put up a couple graphics here. How about you take a swing at it, and then I'll come back and let's talk about what kind of people should be involved in disaster recovery.
Really, the short answer is everybody should be involved in disaster recovery, right? I have a very heavy VMware background, but from a VMware perspective, if I was creating a DR plan, I'd also need to talk to my backup admin, my network team, my storage team, and most importantly, the ops who's probably going to be carrying out this plan when it happens, and the application and workload owners, right? Because if I don't have a good understanding of, hey, how critical is this application? What kind of recovery point objective do I need to hit? What kind of recovery time objective do I need to hit? I can't really design a solution that will allow us to recover these applications. So it's one of those things. Everybody really needs to be involved and everybody needs to be talking to each other, which I have seen be a little bit difficult in some organizations, quite honestly.
So basically what you're saying is DR can really bring people together.
Absolutely.
Right? So, yeah, you brought up a couple of really interesting ideas. You talked about determining what an SLA would look like. And I really like the graphic that the Veeam creative folks put together on the left-hand side. Even if you're just looking at an application, a workload to think about. I think it's interesting that there's not one person who can say, okay, and this is how we're going to recover it, and this is what we're going to do. You got the backup person in the upper left-hand corner, right? They're the one who knows how to use the tools. Right. In the upper right-hand corner, you've got the workload owner. So that could be a DBA, that could be an email administrator, somebody who's responsible for the platform to be protected and recovered. And then on the bottom of that diagram on the left, you've got IT operations, who are probably the first people who are going to get the call when something breaks.
Yeah, they're going to get that call that nothing's working, unfortunately.
But my guess is if you don't have all three of those views represented, then you really are not wholly equipped simply just to recover that platform. And platform by platform, that triad's going to change, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to change, but it's going to stay the same too. Look, I always need to be talking to my backup admin, right, as the workload owner to make sure, hey, I need to make sure that my data is no older than 8 hours, right? I can't lose more than 8 hours worth of data. I have an 8-hour RPO. Are you, as the backup administrator, protecting that data appropriately, right? Do I have the right jobs in place? Am I using the right kind of jobs? Am I using the right infrastructure to make sure that I'm never going to lose more than 8 hours of data? So everybody really needs to be talking to each other pretty much all the time.
I love that. Now let's look at the right-hand side. So all three of that little triad from the left diagram is actually, they're all on the right hemisphere of that right diagram, right? That's all the IT folks.
Hmm.
Melissa, you said something really interesting. You said if my application has an 8 hour RTO, meaning how quick can I get it back up and running again? And honestly, my guess is it's the people on that left hemisphere. It's the business owner who really ought to be helping us decide who
Yeah,
how fast does that app need to come back?
absolutely. And that's probably one of the hardest parts of business continuity and disaster recovery is sitting down, looking at all our applications and decide those things. How fast do I need to recover and how much data is acceptable to lose? And honestly, that's usually tied back to dollars and cents, right? It's either in some way, shape, or form that application makes us a lot of money or it's going to impact us financially if we can't use it. And that's usually what gets these RPO and RTO values assigned, but everybody's going to have a really good understanding of A, all the applications in the environment, and B, what are they used for? How are they used for? Who's logging into them? What kind of downtime can we handle? I was actually talking about BCDR earlier this morning because I talk about that a lot. And we were talking about, the digital era where I have a lot of organizations where everybody's working from home now. And maybe that system that they're all logging into to work from home is now the most critical application because they can't sell anything. We can't do any business if our people can't get into our environment to work, right? And that's a little bit of a shift from before when everybody was going to a brick and mortar office all the time and everybody was already there to work with the data.
That totally makes sense to me. One of the last times I did a BCDR consult, I went through an exercise with some of the leadership team, and I said, okay, so let's mock up what this would look like. And I listed like 5 or 6 applications, and one of them was the shipping room application. For putting out packages. And I asked the folks that were in my workshop, hey, stack rank these. So there was a CRM application, there was email, there was unstructured file data, there was the backend database platform, and then there's mailroom. And everybody, they couldn't agree on most of them. They couldn't agree on what was the top, but everybody agreed that the mailroom, the shipping application, was the lowest application. And then I mentioned, oh, by the way, I should mention the client that we're doing this mock exercise for is Amazon. So all of a sudden, shipping room seems to be more important than one might have assumed.
Yeah, that context is really important.
Yes, it is. And IT folks, no offense, because that's most of the people who are listening today, IT folks don't always have that same translation of what does the application downtime actually cost the business. Melissa, you mentioned that with all of our remote workers that times are changing. Let's look at where the remote workers are coming from today.
All
Let's take
right.
a look at the map. Let's see how, hey, Canadians in the
That's a
house.
lot of green.
I love it when the Canadians are in the house because all of a sudden the new hemisphere just turns green right away. So that's awesome. Also noticing some Washington in the house, Florida, almost the 2 most extreme states in the U.S. Colombia, some good times over there. Let's look over in the. Okay, we've got Spain, the Boots. Italy is in the house. Taking a look over, we've got Nigeria, Iran, and you can always count on folks from India joining. I think they are probably some of our most frequent and consistent listeners. So thank you for joining us this morning. And then I should probably give a shout out to there's probably somebody in the state of Ohio that's chiming in somewhere because we got lots of Veemers in Ohio and someone wants to keep us honest. All right, so yeah, please keep piling on. Tell us where you're from along the way. Yeah, so understanding, and that's kind of the first part of the problem, right? Is understanding what does downtime cost the business, right? And translating that back from the business stakeholders back to IT and not the other way around. You mentioned one of the things that I know you spend a lot of time with because you talk to IT pros is what is the skills necessary to be successful in DR? Because backup admins alone don't typically have those skills.
Yeah, there really is a lot of skills that really are important. So, right, if we're just talking up basic DR, right, we need to know how to back up our data.
Mhm.
More importantly, software and hardware, we need to know how to design our applications and how to design our IT infrastructure so that hopefully we don't have a disaster if we lose a rack, right? Hopefully we're designed and architected within our data center to withstand different levels of failure. So maybe we don't need to have a DR exercise if we lose a storage array because we've designed it the right way. You never know. And then applications. We have to have a good understanding of the applications in our environment and the ways that they work. And then, of course, all those other little things like operating systems, hypervisors, infrastructure, kind of that core, right? We really need to know these things. And probably how to back up and recover stuff is like a must know.
And I like the fact that everything that you talked about so far is really around designing resiliency into the present mode of operation, right? Because, if, for example, if I had 8 tires on my car instead of 4, right, 2 on each point, then I wouldn't worry about a flat tire because I just keep going. I guess that's why we all have dualies in Texas. But so there's a certain amount of designing resiliency into the architecture. And that's something that you have a lot of depth expertise in. And then there's, okay, how do I recover those tools? And that's all about IT recovery. But let's turn that over, right? Because that's what a technologist needs to know to recover an app. BCDR is a different set of acumen. It may have come from the backup person, right? I mean, the backup person might be in there, so you could know that data. But let's talk about what BCDR folks really need to provide as guidance to their organizations.
Yeah, and they should have a basic understanding of how things work in an IT infrastructure. I think that just helps everybody. But there's really less techie stuff they need to understand. They need to understand all of the operational processes and economics for the business, right? How does our business run? What do we actually do? What are the things that we must continue doing? They need to understand the business to IT dependencies. How does that translate into our systems that we're protecting? And then depending on what type of customer it might be kind of different compliance regulations for the industry, for where they are, data sovereignty. It really kind of depends on the industry, location, all that kind of good stuff. So it's a lot of like the almost softer skills that I know a lot of us techies tend to just overlook because we're so focused on speeds and feeds and RTOs and RPOs. But that's all tied back to a wider business continuity plan.
Right. Maybe the way for folks to think about this is everything that's in the green, everything that the technologists do, that is the what and the how. But what's really important is when your organization is thinking about real BCDR planning, it has to start with the why. Right. And that's those orange boxes on that right hand side. Why is it this application has an RTO of 2 hours instead of 8? Why is it that that the business process would suffer if the IT systems go down? Why is it that these healthcare applications have a different standard than the rest of the environment? So that those whys are just so important. And admittedly, I think this is a great growth opportunity. If you are a data protection specialist, if you're a backup person, then transitioning from the tool sets on the how to being one of those guides to figure out the why, I think there's a great career path transition there if you can get the right training for it.
Yeah, and it absolutely ties back to what we started with. It's more than just the IT people in a room deciding all this stuff, right? Because as the backup admin or the VMware admin, I might not understand all of the business, and operational processes. I just know my job is to keep VMware running. If anybody has any performance issues, I got to figure them out. And I just want that vSphere environment to always be available, right? Starting with why can be kind of difficult, and a lot of customers haven't necessarily done that. They might not even have decided what their RPOs and the RTOs for the applications are, right? And it's really hard to make sure that you're protecting your data the right way if you don't even know how fast you need to be able to recover it.
Yeah, and in fact, for the folks at home, if you're thinking about homework coming off of this particular session, that's a great conversation opener, right? If you are a workload owner and you happen to know who is the VP or the GM or the director of the users of your application, right? The beneficiary of your hard work, right? Take them to lunch, buy them a coffee, get on a Zoom call, something, and say, hey, look, I could fail your application over in 1 hour or 8. Convince me. Right? That's a great conversation to have is how fast do you really need to get back up and why? Because otherwise what will happen is you go to any business leader, they say, it has to go as fast as possible.
Application of the company. I'm the most important right here, me.
Most important.
I heard that a lot early in my career in the early days of virtualization. Everybody had the most important application and everybody needed me to give them a ton of CPU and memory in their VMs because they were number one. And I was like, I'm not sure about that. I'm just not sure.
Oh, I went the other way. I would say, absolutely. You are the most important application. Here's the bill for
Yes,
what
yes.
that's going to take the way that you asked for it. I'm going to need to cost charge you for that. What's your cost center number? And they're like, well, I mean, and you get this really awkward conversation. Then you say, okay, now let's start to balance. What are you going to pay for versus what you think you need? So it's I was ornery as a youth. So, but it got some good conversations going. All right. So, hey, let's I want to cover one last thought on this, and then we're going to hit the map really quick back again. So if you haven't yet piled on with where you're from. So we've talked a lot about these differences in skill sets, and I think a lot of organizations really are kind of starting to figure out where this fits. If we go to the next slide, this is actually some independent research that was done around who is predominant, who is part of the what do you call it? The BCDR planning council process team. And also, by the way, who's sitting at the top? Who's sitting at that end desk? Who's deciding this along the way? And I think you find two really interesting stories. If you're looking at the brighter greens, actually the way to really look at it, look where the backup admin sits. Right? They're kind of the middle of the road on both lines. They're not the ones driving this conversation. It's either IT ops,
Mhm.
or it's that IT leader, that VP of IT, that CIO. They're the ones driving the process. IT operations is like 3 times as likely to be at the table and 4 times as likely to be running the meeting than the backup admins. This just kind of reinforces that. Melissa, are you surprised by how this data lays out?
Not really, honestly. It's kind of showing some of our tying back to the business, having the CIO there, right? CIO is very chief information officer. He's very in tune with he or she is very in tune with the business requirements, whereas maybe the backup admins aren't as much. But you know what? At the end of the day, everybody needs a seat at the table, and the backup admins need to be definitely kept in the loop because they're the ones who are going to be able to tell you, hey, here's how we can achieve those RPOs and RTOs, and here's how much it's going to cost you.
That's right. That's right. All right. So I promised we hit the map. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got a wide range of personas on the slide. Let's look at a wide range of folks on the call. So let's go back to North America really quick. We got Kansas in the house. I spent some time there over the summer. New York. A lot of us are thinking about y'all this month on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So thank you for joining us. Let's see, over in Europe, what do we got? We got Netherlands, we got Germany, Bulgaria's in the house. Don't see them quite as often. Thank you for joining. How about go over to LATAM? You can always count on my friends over there for joining. So we got Jamaica, we got Brazil, some good time down there. Mexico, is that Uruguay? Maybe. South Africa, Angola over in the African Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, and looks like Egypt came in from Facebook. So yeah, whichever of the 3 mediums you are watching us on, please continue to pile on for that. Let's see. Oh, and you know what? So we also got some comments on here as well. Don't just tell us where you're from. Tell us what you're thinking about. We'll try to answer your questions. Melissa, VJ commented on it's good to bridge the technical with the business impact. I love that, right? So because all of us technical people, we want to talk about RTO and RPO, and
Right.
yet you got to pay for it with dollars and euros.
We got to get our money someplace. Like I can give you some really, really fast RPOs and RTOs, but it's going to cost you.
That's right. But I think the other way around is flip that around and tell me how much does it cost you when you're down, right? If we can spend 10%, 20% of your estimated downtime cost to mitigate that downtime, right? Then you just saved 90% of that budget.
That's a
And in
really
fact,
good way to look at it. You're going to save money by doing DRA.
you are, right? Look, here's the way I think about it. Servers break.
They
Stuff
do.
happens, right? I mean, that is reality. It's kind of like your plumbing is going to have leaks, right? Occasionally you will lose some water along the way. And I guarantee the water on your water bill for that leak, that is not in your budget, right? And so the water leak is you're already losing money. So if I spend a little money on a plumber to fix the leak and it costs me less than the leak would have cost me in water, then I have actually saved money. right?
You have. And I don't think a lot of people look at DR that way. They don't look at it as I'm going to save money if I have an outage. They're looking at it as it's going to cost me money for something that I might not even ever use. But let's face it, in the age of what is going on in the current climate with cyber and ransomware, chances are you're going to use it. Ransomware is a disaster. It's not if, it's with when. On the Friday show, I kind of looked at my watch and I was like, oh, ransomware clock. Someone is getting hit someplace. I mean, it's constant.
Ransomware o'clock. I love
Ransomware
that. I'm
clock.
gonna totally steal that and use that from you. Um, yeah, I mean, stuff breaks, right? You're gonna have downtime. If you can mitigate that, you are saving money.
Yes.
And I think there's a reason why most organizations think about data protection the same way they think about insurance, right? There are not many drivers driving a car, especially a nice car, on the road who are not paying for car insurance, right? And it's the responsible thing to do because you would rather pay a little each month than buy a new car. I would rather back up a little each month than have to go buy a new IT infrastructure. All right, so let's flip gears though. So, because I mentioned a nice car, versus not a nice car. So there are different tiers of applications, right?
Yeah.
There's not one size fits all. There's not one insurance plan to hit them all. And this again is something that you spent some time with, Melissa. To cue you up for this, I actually grabbed this slide. So Gartner actually did a rather interesting piece early 2020-ish, but it was a really nice piece on 16 tips to enhance your DR. It actually follows a lot of the DRII best practices that CDRPs have known for a very long time. But I thought the chart was a good one. So
no, it is a good chart.
Yeah. So walk us through this, because I thought this was a clean way to help organizations say one size does not fit all.
And that's true. One size does not fit all. So we have our mission critical applications, really, really low RPOs and RTOs. They need to be running. And we're going to protect that differently than we would a tier 4 bronze tier, right? Tape-based recovery. So the good thing is there are software solutions out there. I wish I could think of one right now that allow you to protect all of your data the same way. So when I go to protect my data and recover it, if I'm using something like Veeam CDP, configuring it, working with it, recovering, looks and feels almost the exact same way as working with a Veeam replica or a Veeam backup. So why under the covers that we're using different levels of protection and technology from an operational standpoint, everything looks and feels very similar from a protection and recovery aspect. And there's all sorts of ways to meet this, right? For tier 0, Veeam CDP comes to mind. But when we're talking about tiers 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 even, we can get kind of flexible, right? We could do different type of backups. We can, depending on how often we're backing up, if we're going to use regular replication or storage-based replication. There's about 1,000 solutions for each application out there. It's about finding the right balance of performance for RPO and RTO, and of course, cost, right? We do want to try to be somewhat cost conscious in this because we don't want to shock our app owners and our business owners with this huge bill at the end of the day. So cost is, of course, top of mind with these solutions as well.
So one thing I like about what you talked about was, there are several ways to do this. Now, you mentioned CDP, one of the most recent offerings available from Veeam. I'm gonna roll the clock back 31 years. Right, 31 years ago, when I first started doing data protection, right? At the time, what we had was you would take all your applications and put them on this line. Huh?
Nothing. You had computers?
Wow. That's cold and not entirely inaccurate. But we would say, for those mission critical applications, we use things like SRDF, synchronous disk block storage, usually with NetWare SFT3. Look it up on Wikipedia, or it's in a history book near you. And so that was, zero failure rate. It was clustered on the workload. It was mirrored in the storage at a block level. That was great. And then you had this other extreme, nightly tape backup, right? And there was almost nothing in between, right? I mean, there was no asynchronous was not a thing. Software based was not a thing. And then over these years, what you saw was, okay, asynchronous storage started coming into it, then asynchronous replication, and now it's a gamut. And I love that it's almost that sliding lever of, what's your RPO, what's your
It's
RTO,
almost
put
like
it
a
on the
menu, right?
line.
Like pick from the menu. And do you want a side of something with that, or you want it plain, or?
Yeah, but here's the fun part. You can pick from a menu, but it's one menu from one store, right? It's one
Yes.
vendor that lets you do that.
It's like a diner.
Unlike when my kids were little, it was not uncommon for us to go through more than one drive-through in a single meal because everyone wanted to use, I want to use my disk mirroring from this vendor. I want to use my replication from this vendor. I want to use my backup over here, right? And that becomes really cost prohibitive as a parent. Can I get an amen?
Yeah, absolutely. Amen.
So instead, wouldn't it be great if you could actually cover that entire gamut from near zero RPO all the way up through nightly or even less than nightly backup as one set of capabilities? Speaking of gamuts, by the way, I'm looking at the clock. Let's hit the map one more time. Let's go back to the U.S. first. See in the U.S. Okay, hey,
Wow.
Louisiana's in the house. Coming back from the floods. Glad to see you back online. Let's see over in Europe. We got France. Got some good friends in Belgium and Switzerland. Russia. Love it when Russia comes online. It's kind of like Canada. Makes a whole big chunk of the map turn green again. So that's awesome. Lebanon, Oman. Is that Uganda? I think on there. Oman's actually new. The only reason I know that is because of one of my kids' maps not that long ago. Otherwise, I would not have been able to pick that up. So thank you, Oman, for joining us today. Let's look at the big map again. That's a lot of green,
It's a lot of
Melissa.
green. We're doing
A
pretty
lot of
good.
green. All right. So let's go back to that chart one last time. There's one other thing, and I think you actually taught me this when how important this was. We often start talking about the most important applications being mission critical along that way. But if you don't have DNS, if you don't have DHCP,
Yeah, you're gonna need that.
if you don't have plumbing, then none of that stuff turns on, right? None of it actually connects again.
And that's what a lot of people tend to forget, kind of those core infrastructure services that you need just to work, right? They're not directly impacting your business's reputation or how much money you're making in the next hour online, but guess what? You can't do anything without them. So those are really, really important to keep an eye on too.
Yeah, when I did my workshop and I was listing those applications, you list things like CRM and SQL and DNS and DHCP, and they were the things just lower in priority than mailroom, right? It's like, really, you don't think you're going to need IP addresses? That'll be
Yeah.
fun. I would like to watch that session, please. I'll bring popcorn. So anyway, all right, we're almost at the end of time, Melissa. I'm going to ask you for one quick last pearl of wisdom, last nugget. But before we do, we want to advertise. Melissa and I did a Trailblazer talk, which is a thought leadership series, not that long ago. The URL for that's on the bottom of the screen: VEE.am/BCDR21 talk. You're going to get a lot more information on some of the same stuff. This is on demand. You can watch it now. Melissa, give a plug for your Friday and then give us your closing wisdom on the way out.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Friday, you can tune back in and see myself and, the Friday standard Rick Vanover. We're going to talk about Veeam orchestration, 4 different ways. Spoiler alert, I might have alluded about different ways to protect your data. So we're going to actually show you how to do it with Veeam.
All right.
And last kind of parting thoughts, really make sure that you have a good understanding of the business behind your applications, right? Because unless you understand the why you're protecting these things or why you've just deployed 25 VMs and now you have to back them all up, it's really difficult to kind of make sure that you're meeting those business requirements. And if we're not satisfying the business, we're really not doing our jobs as IT professionals at all.
Amen, amen. And the only thing I'll add to that is that if you're really going to do real BCDR planning, you're going to need a bigger conference room. No matter how big it is, you're going to need a bigger room. All right, with that, make sure to tune in on a Friday to see Melissa and Rick. Tune in next Monday. We'll do part 2 of this series.
I'll be back.
Melissa, thank you for coming back. And until then, thanks for watching. Take care. good morning, or good afternoon, or for a lot of folks that join us from Asia Pac in particular, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We are in the second of a three-part series looking at business continuity and disaster recovery. I am so pleased to not have Dave Russell. Wait, that's not the way I should say that.
Gee,
We have
thanks.
a
I'm
special
not Dave
guest
Russell.
for this three-part series. Melissa, it's morning time where you are. Good morning, and thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason, especially to come talk about some of my favorite topics, right? Business continuity and disaster recovery.
Amen, amen. So Melissa and I have actually partnered together on some other talks along the way. In fact, if we could bring up that first slide, just a couple months ago, Melissa, you and I had the chance to do what Veeam calls a trailblazer talk,
Yes.
and bad things happen to good data. Which I don't know who in marketing came up with that, but I think that's absolutely brilliant because stuff breaks, right? Bad things do happen, and how do you recover from that? So the link is on the bottom of the screen. We're going to take a few pieces of a few slides from that particular deck because now, Melissa, we had a Twitter poll on what folks wanted to hear on this part of the
Yeah,
series.
I love this show so much because we do so much interaction. Like, so first and foremost, we're going to keep putting this map on the screen as we go through today. And we want to know where you're from. So be sure, whatever platform you're watching on, leave where you're from in the comments, US states, countries, wherever. We want to give you a shout out and see where everybody is tuning in from. But we also did a poll on LinkedIn, and I might have known what I was asking because I specifically went and asked our viewers, what are some of your problems when it comes to disaster recovery specifically? And my options on the poll were pretty interesting. And it was the things that a lot of people have kind of a lot of problems with. So large scale discovery, recovery, 38% had an issue with that. Testing
Okay.
DR plans, 31%. But keeping DR docs up to date and knowing your RPOs are going to be met, 18 and 13% respectively. So there's a big issue with documentation and testing when it comes to DR. So today we're going to dive in with documentation. Then next week we'll have part 3 of 3 and really dive into testing.
Fantastic. So I think it's interesting that all the topics that were scored, all of them are presuming a crisis at scale, right?
Yes.
So whether it's about documenting in advance, whether it's about actually doing the execution, crises at scale. And that's a different set of problems than what we typically would see with a server broke, a storage array broke, et cetera. We did some research on this. So this data actually comes out of Veeam's annual Data Protection Trends Report. And we looked at what are the causes of outages. Melissa, I want to unpack this for the kids at home, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So you can see the link in the upper right-hand corner, VEE.am/DPR21 report. Now, this is, for the second year in a row, the largest independent, unbiased research study in data protection that we're aware of. So 3,000 respondents at different points answered parts of this survey question. Now, what you're looking at is that over 2 years, 2 different reports, they answered on the dark green, what kinds of outages have they had? And then what you're seeing in the gray was the most impactful outage of 2019. And then in the bright green, the most impactful outage of 2020. I think there's 2 things that are really interesting about this data. One, if you look at the top 3 options for overall most commonly what breaks, it's that stuff breaks, right? Hardware breaks,
It breaks. It
infrastructure
happens.
issues, application issues. That hasn't changed in, I've been doing this 31 years, Melissa, maybe a little less than 31 for you, but still, any surprises on the causes of outages overall?
A big increase from 2019 to 2020 in cybersecurity events. One of the things I say a lot of lately is that ransomware is a disaster, right? So we've been seeing a lot more cyber ransomware attacks in the last, year or so.
Yeah, take a look at those bright green lines, and what you see is it's almost a two-way tie between infrastructure and networking issues and cyber, and both of them around that 16% number, which I think is really, really interesting. And you're right, cyber is certainly a disaster. I would also offer that for all those organizations that are jumping on the cloud, right, those hyperscale hosted environments, I think that's actually why you're seeing some of the spikes in infrastructure networking, because, oh, by the way that you plumb to an Azure or an AWS,
It matters.
It's hard,
Yeah.
right? It's a difference. It's a different set of plumbing than, hey, I'm just going to go down to that hub or switch that's one rack away. I think that's really interesting as well. So that's the causes is overall. So that's what happens, or that's why outages happen. Let's turn that around and say what happens because of that. And so, and Melissa, you and I have both had a lot of time in BCDR. Um, uh, Here is when organizations were asked, what are the impacts of downtime? Now, this doesn't include things like, the actual cost of productivity, right? So users sitting on their hands because they can't do their work. But I do think it's interesting. There's actually, when Dave Russell and I have covered this slide a little earlier, I think it was Dave pointed out there's kind of three bands to what happens when an outage occurs. The first two things, loss of customer confidence and damage to brand integrity, those are the external
Right.
ramifications of what happens. Then we see the next two, loss of employee confidence, diversion of resources. Those are the internal
Mm-hmm.
ramifications. And then you get all those third parties that start to get involved, reduce stock price, legal action, revocation. But I got to tell you, I think my favorite answer on here is the 8% on the bottom. When downtime happens, turns out nothing bad occurs. 8% said, no, we're good. We don't mind when servers go down.
Well, maybe, maybe they had really high numbers for their RPOs and RTOs, and their business requirements did not demand, they were in operation and they still met their SLAs even though they had an outage. So we can't completely outrule them. I just want to know what kind of line of business they're in that they didn't have any issues. So that
I'm
would be
thinking sole
interesting.
proprietor, like,
Yeah,
one
right.
man shop, one
Whatever.
of them is off anyway. Maybe if you reboot, the servers will come back online, right? Anyway, for the rest of us, for the other 92% of organizations, there's not just one impact that kind of comes out of that, right? So there's a broad variety of impacts that come out of that. When you think about some of the organizations that you've worked with, Melissa, what of this list kind of stands out for you?
I think I'm going to start with the customer impact, right? Because at the end of the day, if we're the IT people, we usually have internal customers, right? The business is coming to us to provide a service, right? But ultimately, we're providing that service for a reason. So when we're talking about like external facing brands and stuff like that, customer confidence and brand integrity, they're hard to measure. But if you go to use a service online, you want to go to www.whatever.com and it doesn't work, you're going to go someplace else and you're probably not going to come back. So that is huge.
I'll buy on that. All right. So, oh, by the way, not only did we ask folks, hey, pile on Facebook, on LinkedIn, tell us where you're from, but also, please keep questions and comments coming. Dillian came up with an interesting one on having no redundancy or offsite storage in case of a hardware or software event happening without notice. I love that. And Melissa, you have spent a lot of time designing redundancy so that it wasn't always about failover, it was about resiliency. You want to unpack that for
Yeah,
Jillian and the rest of us?
exactly right. And part of it is, especially when it comes to risk and business continuity and disaster recovery, everything's not the same, right? So when we're talking full scale recovery, yeah, that's another site, whatever. But it's also about building in resiliency, like Jason said, within your data center design. So for example, if I have a vSphere cluster and I have 16 nodes, I'm not just going to pile all 16 nodes in the same rack, right? I'm going to space them out through different racks, maybe different power sources, so that if I lose this single rack, I don't lose my whole environment. So depending on what level of failure you're architecting for, and this is what IT architects do, we evaluate all that, right? From all the way down from the servers to the drives and the storage array, all the way up to the app. There's different things that you have to consider and kind of even physically lay out within your data center when you're trying to design in a resilient manner.
That sounds like it could be really complicated. It's too bad we don't know anyone who's like a certified architect in these kinds of architecture
If
stuff.
anybody knew how to design VMware really well.
If only we did. Melissa, you should go ahead and brag on what is the credential that makes you so suitable for this conversation.
Yeah, so I am a VMware certified design expert. There's less than 300 of us in the world. And I've spent a lot of time designing VMware vSphere environments, right? All the way down from the storage, the networking, the recovery, everything soup to nuts to make sure that, when I was architecting solutions from customers, they would be able to survive any level of failure that might occur.
one of 300 VMware certified design experts. See, my only claim to fame is my first certification exam was DOS. Doesn't sound near as impressive as what you've got. All right, so let's. Speaking of impressive, let's look at the map. Let's see how green that we turned things. I love it when Canada weighs in. Just all of
Yay,
a
we
sudden
got
there's
some
this
big
big
countries.
green monster chunk. Yeah, so to all the Canadians out there, thank you for joining in. I am hailing from the great state of Texas. Our producer is in Georgia. I'm pretty sure that's New Jersey
It is.
in the upper right hand corner. So good pile for that. Let's take a look over in Europe. We got France, we got Switzerland. Let's see. Our social media has run out of Bucharest. No one in Latin yet. I'm gonna have to work on that. Where are my Brazilian and Argentinian friends this morning? Someone did not have coffee. All right, what else we got? So we got South Africa, always a pleasure when they're in. Nigeria's in the house. Trinidad, Tobago. Let's see, where else we got? Saudi? Nice. I don't think we had anyone from Saudi in a while. Australia, our friends down under have weighed in. Thank you for that. Thailand is in the house. And Indonesia. So yeah, please keep the questions coming. Please keep telling us where you're from. Our mission at Veeam, as well as on this live stream, is to turn the world green. We just have different ways of doing it. All right. So we talked a little bit about architectures. Now, you are an expert in this field. I just happen to have been doing it for quite a long time. But there are some other experts that we should cite as well. Remember, this is the second in a three-part series. Last week, we brought up a chart from Gartner about their 16 recommendations, which I thought was really good. Actually, a lot of it comes out of DRII. As well. But Gartner did actually have three really interesting aspects, and I would recommend if you have a Gartner subscription, download this paper. It was really well written. But there are kind of three core tenets that they came back with. One was around aligning IT disaster recovery planning with the business. Melissa, that sounds a lot like what we covered last week.
Yeah, exactly. It was.
And this week, we're going to talk about documentation, right? So is there any hints to what we might want to cover next week?
I think we should talk about testing next week.
We should talk about continuous improvement. So we actually did borrow a couple of the elements from this. This is stuff that not only Gartner talks about, but DRII talks about. I am not a VMware CDX, but I am a CBCP, Certified Business Continuity Planner. So that's my FLA to your TLA as far as initials go on that. And we recommend those same kinds of things along the way. But we are going to talk about documentation this week. I don't think there's any part of IT that actually documents well. But if I could pick one area that documents really, really poorly, it's probably DR.
It probably is.
So talk to us about what do you see in the past? Why is it that documentation is so godly important?
It is important just for so many different ways. So first of all, there's the whole notion of a lot of people say, DR, we might not ever use that. And it's going to cost us whatever money. Maybe we'll just wing it and hope we're okay, right? That has changed a lot, especially when you've seen the increase in cyber attacks in the last year, right? So if you're living in an area where geographically speaking, you probably won't have any physical level disasters, you might have kind of blown off DR in the past, but now, anybody can be a victim of a cyber attack. The documentation is so important because it's what we're going to use when we have to recover. So we have to make sure all of our applications are documented, their interdependencies. We have to update that documentation when we either commission or decommission servers. We have to make sure that we're updating that documentation if we have changes in our business requirements, right? Maybe we had to add an extra step of verification due to regulatory reasons or what have you. We always have to keep these documents up to date so when we have to go to use them, they're going to be accurate. Now, if you've ever written a DR document, it's pretty lengthy usually, even if you're doing it at the application level, right? You're documenting everything soup to nuts in that application and how to recover it. So it's time intensive to create, and then someone's got to review it, right? So you have to continuously check in and review, and that takes time as well. There's also the notion of that we should have people who didn't write the docs try to use them in a disaster recovery test, right? Because if a disaster happens, a person who writes it might not be the person, or most likely won't be the person that's recovering, right? So we need to actually test our documents as well to make sure, hey, I'm the app owner. I have so much knowledge of this app. Everything makes perfect sense to me. But when I hand it to the storage guy, he's clueless. He doesn't know what anything means. So we have to kind of constantly revise it as well to make sure it's actually usable.
So I really like that last point, and it's one that when I first started getting into disaster recovery planning was one that they would really pound home to us when we were working as consultants. The idea that the personnel that were the experts, right, the ones who originally they deployed the apps, they run the infrastructure, they know everything. When anything small breaks, they put on that superhero cape, they go and solve that. Your disaster recovery plan should presume that that person is not available, right? So for whatever reason, that's not going to be the person who's going to jump in during a disaster. Now, it is the 20th of September, so we actually just went past the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So certainly a lot of Americans, I know organizations where they lost those people during those attacks, but that is not the that's not so uncommon. So I live down in Texas. We have a lot of floods down in the Houston area. And when I was first learning disaster recovery, one of the things they would teach us was when Houston downtown floods, right? What would happen is that the IT infrastructure was all dead, right? The problems were there, and when you called the IT folks, hey, come in, we got to get this stuff running. It's like, yeah, my living room is underwater. I ain't going nowhere. That's exactly how Bubba would answer that question. So you should assume that the heroes who architected your production infrastructure are not going to be there for running that secondary, which is where we have those plans come in. Before we get into, say, what's a better way to do that, Melissa, a comment came in from Veeam that I thought was really interesting. I think he's riffing off of what you said earlier. He said, what happened if we replicate ransomware and CryptoLocker from production to DR? Because we talked about how disaster is a kind of
cyber is a disaster.
Ransomware is a kind of disaster. What's your thoughts on that? I'd like to reply, and then let's kind of make
of course,
better.
If we're talking like true replication, storage level replication, Veeam replication, yeah, you're replicating whatever the latest changes in the last 15 minutes. Yeah, you're sending the ransomware. The trick is when it comes to recovery from ransomware, you need to go back farther in time, right? So you need to go back to before the data was being encrypted. So with Veeam replicas, just pick an earlier restore point. Same thing with the storage snapshot, go back earlier in time. And I guess even with backups, right, you still might need to go back earlier in time to get to a point before that encryption is started.
So I love what Tomas put in the same thread, talking about how usually replication to DR is asynchronous. So there could be a window there. I think the thing I would offer is that when you think about most disasters, whenever you use that D word, you're thinking earthquake, fire, flood, major power grid outage, right? So in all of those scenarios, the assumption, and we all know what happens when you assume, but the assumption is that the data as of the last moment that it was touching the disk drive is pristine. And so all you're really trying to do, you want as little RTO and RPO as possible. How quickly can you get that iteration of the data running again? To Brahim's point, that is exactly not the copy that you want during a ransomware or cyber event. The copy of, a few seconds before the zero-day exploit is no better than the version that actually corrupted itself.
It's a little bit, while we can use the same tools to recover from ransomware that we can with a regular, disaster, it's a little different, right? Because when you get to the point where, okay, like you don't discover ransomware and immediately go, okay, hit the restore button, right? There's a bigger IT security incident response that happens there. There's going to be some evaluation where the response teams come in, either internal or external, right? And say, okay, hey, what happened? When did it happen? When were we infected? How did we get in? And from there, your recovery strategy might change a little bit based on what's found in those initial steps. But you're most likely not saying, hey, hit that button, go. But yeah, you're going to have to go back in time to get to that point before the ransomware started encrypting your data. So it's a lot bigger process when we talk about ransomware, because we're getting a lot more people involved.
But I think if we were going to simplify it for the DR folks on the call, what I would suggest to you is all the preparation and documentation you do up front is nearly the same. All of the orchestration and documentation that you do on the back is
Is the
nearly the
same.
same.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that you're injecting what can be a rather heavy process in between to validate that the copy that you are going to recover from is pristine. And once you've injected that step and you validated that, yes, we have a good set of data to come back to, then regular DR operations, for the most part, start to scale back in. By the way, we continue to get some good comments on that DR planning, and they're piling in from a couple different places. Let's get the map up. And then we do want to talk about documentation. That's what the world asked for. So how about we go over to Europe first and take a look. So we got Czech Republic, fantastic food over in Czech, by the way. Germany's in the house. Portugal, I'm seeing. Romania, Slovakia, very nice. How about Latam? Did anyone weigh in over there? There you go. There are my Brazilian friends, as well as Ecuador. And is that Costa Rica? Maybe. All right. How about over in Asia? Pakistan's in the house. Thailand, always nice to see India. And I don't think I've ever had a live stream where India didn't chime in. So thank you for that. And Kazakhstan, we don't see them as often, so that's awesome. And then anyone else? I think Algeria is new on this one. So fantastic. So please just keep piling in from that. Melissa, I have been putting you off on documentation now
That's okay.
for 19 minutes into our stream. Please solve this for us. Documentation, go.
Yeah, so documentation, right? You need to make sure that your documentation is accurate in the first go and up to date, right? So it's creating a documentation, it's updating the documentation, and then during an execution or a test, right? Usually, back in the day, when I used to do DR tests in the data center, I'd have everything printed out on a clipboard. There'd be checkboxes to fill out. You did this step, you did this step, you did this step. And as a human being, it's actually pretty easy to mess that up, especially when you're under intense pressure, right? Because, hey, the app is down, we need to fix it. And you're trying to follow the documents. Did I skip this test? Did I did that? Did I check that box? I can't remember. And, it all kind of comes back to following that plan and making it updated. Now, here's where everything falls off the bus, right? Really, ideally, you need to have a disaster recovery plan for every application in your environment. That's a lot of time and effort to invest in your vSphere environment and making sure that it's recoverable at the VM level, right? But it's something we have to do. So what we kind of bring to the table at the Veeam is orchestration and automation, right? Let's automate that. Let's automate the most time-intensive and error-prone aspects of disaster recovery, right? So when we add Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator on top of your existing backup and replication installation, right? All your jobs, everything you're doing today in backup and replication and protecting your data, we're going to leverage that in Orchestrator. And we have a bunch of different types of documentation in Orchestrator. So here you can just see I've pretty much run a plan in Orchestrator. I have one VM in it just because I was testing something for a little, playing around with things. But you can see all the steps on the side, right? So I checked my licenses, I restored it, I checked the VM heartbeat, and then I migrated it to its new data store, right? Everything is good to go. Now, here's the interesting part. For bigger DR plans, we have everything like this easily accessible through the Orchestrator UI. But we're also dynamically generating this documentation that can be downloaded from the Orchestrator UI, or it could be automatically sent to key stakeholders, right? So I think we have one more slide where I kind of show the view of the documentation pane in Orchestrator. And you can come into Orchestrator and see all your different types of documents, right? So there's a couple different kinds, right? I have a couple right here. I have a readiness check. That's a lightweight check that we're going to run daily to make sure that, hey, I'm meeting my RPO and everything looks good. I am ready to fail over at a moment's notice. A data lab test is a real live DR test. I don't want to spoil anything too much for next week, but we're going to talk a lot about testing next week. But as that test, you get a document that, hey, we're full of green check marks and everything was good, or no, we're loaded with red X's. And here's what you need to change to improve things in the future, right? And then the big thing is the plan definition report. So here's the great thing about a plan definition report. It is every VM in your environment, every step that is taken on every VM. And most importantly, if you scroll all the way to that end of that report, you're going to get a full audit log. And it's going to say, hey, Melissa created this plan. And then guess what? Jason logged in and he changed things for better or for worse, right? Maybe Jason was supposed to go add some steps to the plan, or maybe he wasn't. Who knows, right? It depends. But that's going to be basically your disaster recovery plan. And when it comes time to test that plan or execute that plan or update that plan, Orchestrator is going to do all that automatically for you. You don't actually have to create, test, and update your DR documents anymore.
So I would like to think that if I went in and edited one of your DR plans, that I was probably doing some value add, some refinement, right? Not introducing entropy into the
I'm sure maybe
conversation.
adding a couple different application verification steps, some custom scripting that we're doing in our environment, having Orchestrator run some of our existing DR scripts for us, that kind of thing.
I would like to think I'm super helpful when it
Very
comes to
helpful.
that, especially the emojis throughout the documentation. Look, so the one thing that I will pile on though that I love, and you taught me this a couple years back, is the power of consistently testing the same way that you're actually going to execute. So because I've had that CIO behind my shoulder saying, when are you going to be up? When are you going to be up? Someone's calling in, hey, wait, this app isn't working yet either. I'm on step 8 of 14. And I've missed one along the way. And so I love the idea of one, not only scripting the workflows themselves, but the workflow is in the test, and it's the same workflow that you'd use in execution. It's gonna run the same way that you test each time. I think that's absolutely brilliant. We do need to. We're going to hit the map really quick. There's a couple last things that came in. Typically, I don't do the map this late, but Russia chimed in, and it's a big.
That's a very green map.
It's a big chunk of green.
Colorado, Italy, and Russia have joined us. Welcome, welcome.
That's there's more green than not, which means that is purpose built. All right, so we are going to spend. I promise we're going to spend more time next week on doing those iterations and that testing. You spoke my love language, green check marks and red X's. We're going to talk about
from you.
Red X's are actually more. I like red X's more than I like check marks. So we're going to cover that. But before that, there's a few other things that are going to happen. On Friday, you're up again. It's like
I'm back again. And we're actually going to be talking about ransomware recovery plans, which might sound suspiciously like a DR plan, but we're going to actually take you through things to do beforehand in your environment so that you can recover from ransomware later, as well as putting together those ransomware recovery plans.
So Veeam and Tamaz in particular, y'all should chime back in.
Friday.
We're going to get more detail on that. And then on Monday, we're going to come back. Melissa's going to join me again for part 3 in the series. We are going to talk about iteration, right, and improvement along the way as part of that. And there's actually more questions, but I'm looking at, I got 1 minute left in the series. Melissa, final thoughts this week as far as documentation. What's one thing you haven't said yet that folks need to hear?
This documentation is also fully customizable, so you can make it your own, put in those app diagrams, put in the number of the pizza place, anything you need, and never have to manually create a DR plan again.
Amen, amen. All right, that's it for this week. We will keep piling on. I see a few more things that are now bubbling into the chat a little bit late, so we have to do those offline. But Melissa, thank you for joining us. For everyone else,
thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Monday. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We are in our third and final installment in what I think of as Disaster Recovery Month. Melissa, thank you for putting up with me for yet another Monday morning.
Thank you for inviting me on yet another beautiful Monday morning, Jason. I always have a good time when we're talking DR.
And we do talk about DR a lot, actually.
Just a little bit.
In fact, if for everything that we're covering this week is actually little bitty snippets that we've been doing from what we did a Trailblazer talk on, July-ish. So we've got a little teaser for that. If you'd like to see the entire talk, including lots of stuff we did not get a chance to cover during the Monday series, you can register for that at VEE.am/BCDR21 talk. This week, Melissa, we're going to talk about continuous iteration and innovation. And I am so jazzed to do that. But before we do, so you are in New Jersey?
Yes, sir.
I hail from the great state of Texas. It looks like my neighbors to the south, Mexico, have already chimed
All
in.
right.
Love that with the beginning of the hour. Buenos dias. Let's see, our producer is in Georgia. We got some Florida in the house as well, so very nice over there. France has already chimed in. Of course, our social medias run out of Bucharest, so always nice to see that. Where else have we got some people? Our goal is to always turn the world green each and every week, and it looks like we've got some work to do this week, Melissa.
We do. So make sure you let us know where you're from in the comments so we can light up that map.
Yeah, and actually use the comments also for let's talk about BCDR. So in week 1, we talked about aligning the needs of the business with their dependent IT functions. Last week, we talked about documentation and centralizing process and orchestration, right? Getting rid of those manual scripts that we all
get rid of those people. Get rid of the humans.
Not the people, just the
humans.
Okay. No. I guess I can tell how your weekend went. All right. And this week, we're going to talk about continuous iteration.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to start that off with, we do actually have a data chart. I borrowed this from an analyst firm. The percentage of DR tests that actually succeed.
Can I tell you what is wrong with this before we even decrypt this data, which is going to tell us something seriously wrong with testing?
All right.
All right, so if we look at the question, right? Tests that succeed or pass. I've seen a lot of folks out there designing DR tests so that they pass, right? Because they want to stay in compliance and please the auditors. So they're architecting a test that's not a real world recovery, but it'll get them those green check marks. The problem with that, it means when recovery time comes, you've never accurately tested your DR plane, and the chances of it actually working are very, very slim. So we're seeing data saying that people aren't even passing their DR tests now. And a lot of these tests are theoretically designed to pass too. So that shows us what a problem DR testing is.
Yeah, we've actually got a neat little graphic that actually shows that. Let's bring that up and then encourage folks to actually take a screenshot of the next one, and we'll come back to this in just a minute. So here's a motto that I have lived off of for years. If you look for green check marks,
I love
you'll find them when you want them, not when you need them.
This is true. If you look for red X's, you'll be able to fix what you need to so you can recover when you want to.
So let's unpack that for a second, because Melissa, I know this is close to your heart. It's close to mine as well. I mean, and we're going to say this a third different way. You said it, I've said it. We're going to do it again. If you're trying to pass, you've actually failed.
Yes, exactly.
Right? I mean, because the whole idea, the goal of DR testing is not to pass. The goal is to figure out.
The goal is to prove that you can recover, right? And to check your RTO. That's the goal of a DR test, to see if you can meet your RTO. It's not passing. It's not getting the green check marks with auditors. You need to see if you can meet that recovery time objective, so you know if you need to make changes, right? So either you can or you cannot recover the servers, which means you need to change things. And if you can't meet that recovery time objective, you then need to go back to the business and say, hey, we can't meet it. Are you sure this is the right number? And if they come back and say, yes, our business says you must meet that number, you need to change something. Probably many things, actually, but that's another discussion.
And we got a lot of senior leadership IT folks that typically will join this call as well. And so I guess the one thing that I would really kind of implore for you in particular is please tell your IT pros it's okay
to fail.
It's okay to fail. Right. So because I think the problem is that for the 3 decades or so that I've been doing this, when the IT pros are seeking to pass, what they're seeking is either to make their boss's boss, or some auditor happy. Right. And when the recovery actually doesn't work later, they're the only people that would have been happy. Right. So instead, give them permission to fail. Right. Your mission in life is to empower them to say, go find where we need to improve. Don't just give me a document that says we're good, because I promise when you need it, you won't be good. So, all right. So with that in mind, let's go back to the data. Let's go back to that first slide and unpack this a little bit. So we got a little bit out of order just because.
Sorry about that. I saw that slide
no.
and I was like,
this is an important deal. 63%, by the way, is the punchline. On average, 63% of organizations will pass, and frankly, I kind of wish that would be a little lower, right? Because the more that you find those opportunities for enhancement, the better prepared you're actually going to be when it's actually time. So
this is true.
So that's our big meta point that I hope you take away today is you need to completely reboot your philosophy for what you're looking for when you're testing. Meanwhile, Melissa, we should reboot our philosophy on what the map looks like. Our goal is
absolutely.
To turn
Let's reboot this map and see how green it is.
There you go.
Lots of green.
We'll get there in a second, but we love it when the Russians join because so much of the world turns green right away. But let's look at the U.S. first. So what do we got? So we got, hey, Wisconsin's in the house. I spent some time up in Wisconsin for a couple of years. Florida's representing. Indiana's representing. California. All right. We're getting there. I've actually, Illinois was in that mix as well, I think. So what do we got now? We got, we already saw France. Italy, Boots, is in the house. Switzerland, always nice to see. In fact, my guess is some of your friends that help with our DR product in that Switzerland area might actually be listening just to make sure that we don't talk about the next version of Orchestrator.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We're not allowed to talk about that yet. All right. So what else we got in the list? Germany's in the house as well. Any more showing up in LATAM? I can almost always, nothing else in there. And then we got, Nigeria's in the house. Zambia. Been a while since we've seen them. Thank you for joining. I see India over in that upper right-hand corner. That's always nice to see. And Bangladesh representing. And I think that's Iran as well. So that's fantastic. So yeah, so please keep chiming in. Please tell us where you're coming from. Okay, so Melissa, we talk about testing, right? So
we do.
So when you do a test, let's remind folks we talked about last week. The power of testing is to test exactly the way that you're actually going to try to recover over.
Which you have documented, right? You have a DR plan and it has servers and steps and the things you do. So the test is, okay, we take this document that hopefully is up to date, right? And we run through it and see if it works or not. Now,
last week you mentioned humans are not actually good at repetitive, detailed tasks.
They're not, especially when they're under stress.
So
this is like a known thing.
Is there anything that we could do to get humans out of the way of those repetitive tasks?
Yeah, but it's more than just, stressed out humans doing repetitive stuff, right? I did DR tests very early in my career. I worked for a company that was on Wall Street a couple years after 9/11, right? So they were very well versed in what happens during a disaster, and we need to have our stuff straight because they had it happen. And basically, we would all go to the data center for a weekend a couple times a year, lock ourselves in there and start running through the docs and everything. I had my little clipboard. Okay, I recovered this server, good. But again, it was all of the IT people or all the infrastructure people. It was a small company in a data center for a weekend. That's not scalable and that's not repeatable because, like, let's say we were even doing it quarterly because we're aggressive. And most people are more like 1 or 2 times a year. A lot of things will change in those 6 months, right? If you go 6 months between tests. And have you really gone back and fixed everything and validated and whatever? So that model is the way a lot of people do things, but it's not really a model for success. So that's why it's so important to add automation to this, right? Can we automate our testing? So we come in, we click a button, our test runs, and we get an email with a report when it's done. That's a much more simple model than locking everybody in the data center. Plus, it will give us tremendous time back, right? When we don't have to keep those plans up to date and test them manually, we're getting time back as the IT people where we can go do things that will drive our business forward, not just meet the bare requirements.
Okay, so I love the picture that you paint around click a button and start a test, right? So, yes. So when I first
I actually did that before we got on the call. No joke. I clicked a button and started a DR test.
So I have a little bit more gray hair than then you're showing. When I would do tests, I have two very quick stories. So you would say you would lock yourself in the data center. I work with companies that would have to declare a disaster. And when you declare a disaster, you cut a 10K, 25K check. All of your people got on a plane. You went to this nondescript warehouse and you started restoring tapes as fast as you could. And you had rows and rows of PCs and fax machines and coffee makers and cubicles. And you would try to spin up an entire site-wide crisis. Thankfully, most companies don't do that anymore. But I will give one big nod. There was and I'm not allowed to use their name, but a very famous, well-known beverage manufacturer located in, I don't know, Georgia-ish. Can't mention their name. But one of their old models for testing disaster recovery, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, was they basically had their data center in a grid, A through Z, 1 through some number, and they would randomly pick, like playing Battleship. Like
I was just going to say data center Battleship. Melissa's going to go destroy bat rack B7. What happens?
That's exactly what they would do. Is they would randomly once a month, they would randomly pick a letter and a number, go to that rack. They would gracefully turn that rack down. They weren't crazy, right? And then they would wheel out those machines, wheel in new machines into that place in the rack, restore, and then see how it went. And so on any given month, you would test something. Here's what I would draw out on both of those. The reason that people didn't test more often way back then was because it was expensive and it was hard, right? The way that organizations can test now with orchestration is neither expensive nor hard. So you're out of excuses. That's kind of my point. So, all right. So let's kind of wrap this part forward, though. So you got the scripts. We talked about those last month. You taught me something when I first joined Veeam a few years ago called a readiness check.
Yeah.
Can you unpack how that differs from I'm going to declare a disaster or I'm going to rack a set of servers? Unpack.
Okay. So a readiness check is really super lightweight, and it's really looking at, are you meeting your RPO, right? Because that's important to know daily, right? This will run daily. Can I meet my RPO? And is my, and in the case of CDP specifically, it will also look your SLA. Have you met your SLA? And then it takes it a step further and looks at your recovery resources and says, are my recovery resources ready? So I have a great example about this. I had built a new storage array, a virtual storage array. I connected it to my environment. I thought I was good to go, connected it to Orchestrator, created a plan, ran a readiness check, and it came back with an error. And it told me your destination host cannot see your storage, so you cannot recover. I forgot to set the export policy for my NFS storage. It was correct. I never actually connected the storage, or it wasn't able even to connect to my recovery environment. And that would be a reason that, hey, I can't recover my environment, right? So it's always looking at your environment and making sure you're ready for recovery. And this is lightweight, runs in seconds, right? This isn't a DR test. This is just a check to make sure things are in a good state. It is not going to check your RTO, however.
So I think I'd been on board at Veeam for about 2 months when you first showed me this tool. And actually, the one that caught me up was we were doing my first test trying to fail over VMs from one location to another. And your readiness check actually showed me that one of my IP addresses on one of my core VMs had a fixed IP address. It wasn't DHCP. And so every time that I had brought it down, I had restored it from backups, I'd done everything else, but I always did it in place. And so surely it always worked. But your readiness check showed me that no, it doesn't have a DHCP address, which means when you rehome that to a different server, it ain't going to find nothing, I think is the
exactly. Unless you do something with remapping the networks, or you had another DHCP server, right? There's a lot of different ways to fix that, but it's going to flag things that are common issues that you would find when you went to recover and they didn't work, right?
And it wouldn't have been that many years ago that I would have just restored all those VMs into a secondary set of metal someplace else. And then you roll up your sleeves and you start figuring out, okay, so why can't this one work? Why isn't this one work? And you just start troubleshooting the list as you bring them on board again, because you're doing it all manual.
Exactly.
Which is, the technical term for that is wrong. along the way. So talk about some of the other things that come out of those readiness checks. And also, by the way, who really should be authoring the readiness check? And who are the other stakeholders within an organization that might actually be interested in receiving that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as creating disaster recovery plans, Orchestrator is so easy to use. Um, Being our people, you can have the application teams do their own DR plans, right? You can lock through everything down through our role-based access and site scopes and give the app teams access to just their resources so they can create their own plans. As far as consuming it, we can have this
Wait, wait,
automatically
wait, wait,
sent.
wait, 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 wait. I want to put a pause on that one
Okay.
because there's some gerbil wheels that are still spinning up depending
Yeah.
on what time zone you're in. That's actually really, really powerful. Think about this. So how often is it that central IT, so the backup admins, IT ops, we've got this plan, but the database admins think they're going to be rogue. It's like, nah, you don't understand my app. I got to be in charge of my app.
And we see that all the time, right? Oh,
Right.
I have the most important app, even if you don't, right? My app is special, whatever, fine. We're going to hand you the keys and you can take care of your app. We'll certainly check what you're doing. We're here to support any issues, but we can empower you to do this yourself.
That's a huge point, and folks should write that down on a post-it note. So being able to enable, by the way, typically when an app owner today in 2021 tells me that their app, has these special nuances, basically what I hear is you have failed to document your application, and it is held together by duct tape and baling wire, because that's the only reason why it should require that level of special handling. But that being said, being able to actually empower them so they can actually define their own policies, and yet you can audit them, right? You can
Oh, yeah,
check,
absolutely.
did they do their part? Did they even try to write the policy? Did it test? Did it pass? You can do all that.
Did it pass the readiness check? Did it pass the DR test, right? We can go, after we do it, it's a process of iterating, right? Create your plan and then check it and test it until you do see the green check marks. Because once you see the green check marks, you'll see the green check marks when it's time to actually recover.
And when you think about that traditional role of that IT pro, that systems architect, and the changing dynamic they have with folks like DevOps and Plat Ops and those kind of folks, this is a perfect example of what next gen IT within the data center ought to look like, where you've got core subject matter experts who are doing platform tools like Orchestrator, and then enabling secondary stakeholders to then own their own destiny as long as they use this consistent set of platforming tools. This is absolutely great for next-gen IT-based architectures.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you've got the readiness check, and the readiness check does the cursory stuff, but you said that's not actually a DR test.
It's not.
Let's play that forward. What's the rest of the test look like?
Yeah, so we can also do something called a data lab test where we use the power of Veeam data labs. You can configure a virtual lab in B&R, set it and forget it, a couple more settings in Orchestrator. I right click, I say, literally, it's like 3 clicks. I say right click, I say verify, as you could see in that screenshot. I go through a quick little wizard and my DR test starts running. In the case of a backup, right, it's going to either use instant VM restore technology if you want it to be a quick test just to see if things work, or we can actually test the full restore of your latest backup. And again, because we're using data labs, this is an isolated environment. There's no impact to production. It started in its own little bubble. So we can check, okay, you can restore all your servers. Then we're going to run through your DR plan and check, can I, do all my plan steps work? Am I recovering everything? Everything looks good. I'll get this nifty little report that will say, yes, you've met your RPO, great job. And yes, you've met your RTO. Here's what it actually is. And if I run that quick check, there's a disclaimer right in that report saying, hey, you ran the quick test and this was your RTO, but this wasn't a full test. So if you want your actual real world RTO, go run that full test. The best part is, there's one more best part. When I run this test and the test is done, of course, I can have the docs automatically emailed, but I can leave it running, right? That means the app owners, yeah.
So hold on for a second. So I know that, because you've also been talking about a lot of these technologies on the Friday calls, which have a lot more technologists in them. But I think for a lot of folks on our leadership call, on the Industry Insights call for Mondays, they may not be familiar with what a data labs actually is.
It's a nice little bubble, right? So we're going to have a little proxy appliance that we configure through backup and replication, all for networking, right? So basically your app starts in this isolated bubble and you can get into it a couple different ways. The easiest way is to go right through the Orchestrator UI, click on your VM, open console, and it will open the console to the copy of the VM that's running as part of the test.
And that could be a multi-VM state. So like if you have
Yep, you
a
just click
complex
on your VM,
application,
open the
web,
console,
middleware, backend
you can get it
database,
all
Active
right there.
Directory, whole test
Super
environment,
simple.
right?
Yeah.
It's sequestered off the main network, so you're not going to have
Isolated.
double standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the app owners, you mentioned something in there. The app owners can actually go in and test their own app. This goes back to that enablement scenario we talked about earlier.
Yeah, so leave it running after the test is done so the app owner can go in, test changes, let the new person wreak havoc on the app, not in production, right? And my most important use case I've been hammering is patch testing, right? There's all these 0-day patches coming out constantly, and people are like, I can't patch because I can't test, or it takes me so long to test that I can't get these patches out in a timely manner. You have an isolated environment started with one click. You go in, you test your patches, you make sure everything works, and you're ready to roll them out to production. So that's probably the use case I've been talking about most lately, just in, with the rise of all the cyberness and all that kind of stuff, patch testing.
So many moons ago, we used to have this phrase, physician do no harm. As a BCDR person, I remember actually bringing down production servers every Microsoft Patch Tuesday. Like you get these patches and you're trying to do the responsible thing, and so you drop the patches in, and that ends up being what breaks the server. Now, this is not a bash on Microsoft. It's just a matter of we didn't really have a method for testing even just OS grade or application patches before they rolled out. And so your goal was you did a backup, you tested the backup, then you ran the patch in production and you hoped for the best. And your only recourse was to restore again. And you had an outage window from that. In this case, you've completely turned that around.
Yeah, absolutely. You're testing those backups with a couple clicks. And either it
Which
works or
tests
it
your
didn't.
DR, right? So
Right, test your
immediately you
ability
got
to DR. So
that,
the first primary use case is you're running your DR test, and that can be
right?
scheduled or on demand. I mean, you could schedule, hey, every third Tuesday of the month, give the app team an 8-hour window where they can wreak havoc after you run a DR test. You can get really choosy in what you do. And then you just kind of test whatever you need to, right? How many things do we do not do because we can't test? We don't patch, right? Let's say I need to do some kind of security audit or test some security settings. Don't want to do that in prod. Do it in a data lab test, right? There's endless possibilities for a copy of your data at the end of the day.
Love that. Love that. All right, let's check the map one last time and see how things are going. Hey, some of my
Wow, that's
favorite
pretty
people in the
green.
house. The Canadians joined us. Awesome. So now the U.S. is literally wrapped around with green stuff, north and southern borders. That makes me extremely happy. Let's see, Brazil, we can always count on them turning South America a lovely shade of green. Thank you for piling in over there. My friends from South Africa have always joined us. Easily one of my most favorite destinations. And they've got good IT too. So thank you. Please feel free to continue chiming in. And let's see, we do actually have a question.
We have a wonderful comment. I don't know which one of us should read that, Jason, but I
No,
love this
you
comment.
can have it. It's cool.
All right, Randy, thank you for your comment. Randy says, my CIO once asked me about our ability to recover from a DR situation, and I said, easy, zero chance because we have zero budget or resources. That's pretty good, and I have a special name for this. Now, I don't know who I'm supposed to give credit to because I don't remember exactly, but maybe it's even you, Jason. The RPO of nope, right? RPO, nope, you cannot recover. And that's the cases in a lot of these situations. And Randy, a lot of things that I've been working with customers for is talking about that kind of data labs use case for patching and app upgrades and app testing and not letting those DR resources sit idle, right? So when I start doing all these tests, I can have a copy of my environment, do analytics, what have you. I've been working with a lot of customers on that piece specifically so they can go back to their CIO and say, hey, we need this DR site, but it's not going to sit there empty. Here's my plan. We're going to give, app one, they're going to test on Tuesdays. App two is going to test on Wednesdays, right? They can spin it up on demand or scheduled. So that's something I've been helping a lot of customers with, try to make that justification of how to get the money. And by the way, I got another trick for getting money for DR right now. Simply tell them that ransomware is a disaster, right? Because everybody wants to get ready for a ransomware attack. Oh, RPO, no. I like that one too. Thanks, Randy.
Nice. So I'm going to make an extra offer.
RP, no. I'm going to start using that actually.
I like that one. RP, yeah.
RP, no.
So often when you talk to senior leadership, they're trying to roll the dice, right? They're trying to roll the dice between surely the disaster's not going to hit us, it's just not worth the value. And so I'm going to offer to you that the problem becomes that you're speaking a different language. You want to speak RPO, RTO, SLA. They want to speak TCO, ROI. We actually did publish an ebook a couple years ago called The Data Protection by the Numbers for Dummies. And it's kind of a Rosetta Stone. It talks about the financial scenarios, the operational scenarios, and the technical scenarios, and really translating those. If you will tweet, tell me more about disaster recovery ROI, and tweet to JBuff, JBUFF, that's me, then I will reply back to your tweet and send you links to the ebook. I also wrote a book in 2010 with a chapter on how to actually financially calculate the cost of downtime. This is before I joined Veeam. This is not Veeam speak, but it will tell you how to actually do that calculation. If you speak their language, you will get their funding. So, all right, Melissa, we got about a minute left. You want to plug Friday, and then I'm going to.
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't seen enough of me lately, I will be back on Friday with my colleagues Rick and Kirsten, and we're going to be talking more about recovery and looking at different quick recovery methods with Veeam. So that's going to be exciting and full of demo.
And speaking of exciting, you and I are not done yet. I notice a very lovely green background behind you today. I have mine just off of camera, and we are getting ready for Veeam On Update. It's been a few months. We've shipped some more products, or about to ship some more products. We got more stuff coming, some direction leading into 2022. And so hopefully, I think we have a link at the bottom. So please make sure to register for Veeam On Update. Melissa, you and I are going to have some DR time.
We will, yes.
That event as well. All right, this officially concludes DR month here at this 3-part series on LinkedIn Live. Good luck on the Friday session. On behalf of Melissa and I and the rest of Veeam, thanks for watching.